Let me tell you something quietly powerful about healing, especially the kind that happens when no one is watching. Because we live in a world where everything is seen, everything is shared, and every feeling is expected to be turned into content. Every thought becomes a post. Every pain becomes a story. Every breath becomes a performance. People share their pain, their growth, their recovery, wrapped in quotes, captions, or aesthetic reels. They share it before they even understand it. They narrate their healing while they're still breaking. They turn their bruises into art before they've even had time to breathe through the ache. And in this constant stream of sharing, posting, updating, reacting, something sacred has been lost. But some people, they move differently. Some people heal in ways the world never sees. They don't announce their wounds. They don't broadcast their progress. They don't need an audience to understand their journey. They move through their transformation quietly, almost invisibly. They do not seek applause, validation, or emotional witnesses. They choose the path that doesn't need lights, captions, filters, sympathy, comments, or eyes. They choose the kind of healing that belongs entirely to them, untouched, unseen, undisturbed. Maybe you know someone like that. Maybe you've met people who disappear for a while, not because they're running from life, but because they're finally turning toward themselves. Maybe you've seen someone retreat into silence, and others didn't understand why, but you did. Or maybe, just maybe, you're someone like that, someone whose healing blooms quietly, like dawn rising, when no one is awake to notice. Someone who feels deeply but speaks rarely. Someone who breaks privately, rebuilds privately, and grows privately. And here's the question people often wonder, but never ask out loud. Why would someone choose to heal privately, in a world where everyone performs their pain? Why stay quiet when visibility is rewarded? Why choose solitude when sympathy is abundant? Why disappear when attention is only one post away? Most assume it's shame, or secrecy, or fear. That silent people are avoiding judgment, that they're embarrassed, that they're hiding. But the truth is deeper than any assumption the world casually throws around. There's an entire psychology behind silent healing, a kind of emotional alchemy that happens far away from eyes, ears, and opinions. You see, healing in silence isn't a sign of weakness. It isn't avoidance. It isn't fear. It's a form of mastery, a kind of emotional discipline that requires strength most people don't even recognize. It's the power to reclaim your hurt without letting the world touch it. It's the refusal to let your pain become content. It's the awareness that some emotions are too sacred for the noise outside. Because whether we admit it or not, public vulnerability comes with pressure. The pressure to explain, to update, to justify, to heal on a timeline that makes sense to others, not to you. When you open your wounds publicly, you inherit expectations. You inherit opinions. You inherit the weight of interpretations that don't belong to you. But private healing, that belongs to you alone. It moves at your pace. It bends to your timing. It honors your boundaries. It respects your silence. People who heal quietly often possess traits psychologists call internal processing, self-repair, and emotional autonomy. They don't heal for applause. They heal for peace. They don't need to be witnessed to feel valid. They don't need the world to know they're hurting in order to grow. They don't require reactions to feel real. Their healing is not a performance, it's a private reclamation. And in a culture obsessed with visibility, that's rare. So rare that it's often misunderstood. Most of us have been conditioned to think that every struggle must be shared to be real, that every breakdown needs a caption, that every comeback deserves recognition, that pain must be articulated to be legitimate. But silent healers move differently. They understand that some wounds close best when untouched by commentary. They know some transformations need darkness, just like seeds. They know some seasons require solitude. They know that healing is not a story, it's a process, and process thrives in privacy. Because when you heal privately, something profound happens. You give yourself permission to break and rebuild, without anyone interrupting the process. Without anyone asking questions you're not ready to answer. Without anyone offering advice you didn't ask for. Without anyone trying to speed up a journey only you can walk. You remove the noise of opinions, the noise of questions, the noise of gossip, the noise of outside expectations. In silence, you allow yourself to feel fully. You allow yourself to understand what broke you, without diluting it through explanation. You allow yourself to sit with your truth until it stops trembling. Silence becomes a sanctuary, not an absence. A safe space where you can sit with your truth, without performing it. A space where your emotions become clear, your wounds become honest, and your healing becomes yours. And maybe that's why some people disappear for a while. Not because they're lost, but because they're finally finding themselves. They step away from the noise so they can hear their own voice again. They step away from the world so they can return to themselves. Quiet healing often starts after a kind of emotional collapse. Not always dramatic, not always sudden. Sometimes it's subtle, almost unseen. When someone realizes they've been carrying too much, explaining too much, hurting too loudly. They reach a point where words feel heavy, and sharing feels exhausting, so they step back. No announcement, no dramatic exit. Just a slow retreat into themselves. A quiet closing of the door. A soft surrender to solitude. But here's the part that outsiders never understand. Not sharing doesn't mean not feeling. Not posting doesn't mean not healing. Not speaking doesn't mean not breaking open or breaking through. Healing privately means the process becomes sacred. It becomes yours, untouched, unfiltered, and free from misinterpretation. It becomes something you honor instead of something you display. There's a concept in psychology called psychological safety, the feeling that your emotions are protected. And healing in silence creates that safety. Because once you share your pain publicly, it stops being just yours. It becomes a topic. It becomes a conversation, sometimes even a spectacle. People react, misunderstand, judge, relate, or worse, minimize. Suddenly, your pain isn't just something you experience. It becomes something you manage in the eyes of others. But silent healers protect their emotional ownership. They guard their wounds like fragile seeds, not because they're afraid, but because they know growth needs quiet. A plant doesn't announce when its roots are strengthening underground. It just emerges when it's ready. And so do people who heal silently. Some people heal quietly because they've learned something painful about visibility. When you share too soon, people form opinions about your journey before you even understand it yourself. And those opinions can distort the way you see your own healing. They can make you question your feelings. They can make you rush your recovery. They can make you feel observed instead of supported. And so you retreat, not to hide, but to see clearly. Not to run away, but to return inward. Not to disappear, but to rediscover. Healing in silence isn't always peaceful though. People romanticize solitude, but silent healing often involves nights when the weight of your emotions feels unbearable. Nights when your heart aches in ways no one else will ever know. Nights when your mind spirals. When your thoughts race. When the world feels distant even though you're still in it. When loneliness burns but noise feels suffocating. When you want to scream but choose to breathe instead. There is nothing glamorous about silent healing. It is raw. It is uncomfortable. It is heavy. But it is also deeply transformative. And there's something strangely beautiful about rebuilding yourself in the dark. You become your own witness, your own comfort, your own teacher, your own strength. You discover versions of yourself you didn't know existed. The version who can hold their own pain. The version who can self-soothe. The version who can sit in discomfort without collapsing. And slowly, subtly, invisibly, you grow. You shift. You soften. You strengthen. Slowly, you learn that you don't need validation to grow. You don't need understanding to move forward. You don't need an audience to become whole. You learn that healing is not a show. It is a private evolution. And then, without anyone noticing, something shifts. Your voice becomes steadier. Your thoughts become kinder. Your heart becomes lighter. You start breathing differently, softer, deeper, freer. The world still looks the same, but you don't. You move differently. You think differently. You react differently. You understand differently. Without posting, without announcing, without documenting, you simply become it. That's the quiet miracle of healing without anyone knowing. It teaches you that your strength doesn't need witnesses, that your transformation doesn't need applause, that your survival doesn't need an audience, that your pain doesn't need to be validated to be real. that your growth doesn't need to be seen to be meaningful. You learn that healing is not a performance, it's a return. A return to yourself, to your softness, to your truth, to your inner world that no one else has access to. Silent healing is not about hiding, it's about honoring. It's about protecting the parts of you that are still tender. It's about giving your wounds the privacy they deserve. It's about understanding that some emotions need quiet to become wisdom. It's about letting your heart breathe without the weight of expectation. It's about choosing depth over display. So the next time someone goes silent, don't assume they're breaking. Maybe they're rebuilding. Maybe they're rewriting their story in a language only they can read. Maybe they're finally choosing themselves privately, quietly, powerfully. Maybe they're stitching themselves together at their own pace. Maybe they're learning how to feel again. Maybe they're learning how to let go. Maybe they're learning how to trust themselves after being shattered. Maybe they're learning how to stop explaining their pain and start understanding it. Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is heal in a world that glorifies being seen. To reclaim peace in a culture that romanticizes pain. To grow in ways that no one claps for, but that change everything. To rise without an audience. To rebuild without applause. To transform without noise. To let their healing be theirs alone. And maybe that's the real definition of strength. Healing without anyone knowing. Healing because it's time. Healing because it's needed. Healing because you deserve to return home to yourself. Quietly, softly, completely. And if no one ever sees your healing, if no one ever knows your battles, if no one ever hears your breaking or your rebuilding, it doesn't make your transformation any less real. In fact, it might make it more real, because you didn't do it for them, you did it for you. And that is the kind of healing that lasts.